News when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Doug Krizner. China will impose retaliatory tariffs on some Canadian food imports effective March 20th. China's Ministry of Finance says these tariffs include 100% on rapeseed and pea products, as well as 25% on pork and some seafood imports. Last year, Canada imposed levies of 100% on Chinese electric vehicles and 25% on steel and aluminum from China. Well, that led Beijing to launch an anti-dumping probe into Canadian imports, and Beijing also filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization. Meantime, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick is expecting 25% tariffs for steel and aluminum imports to take effect on Wednesday. Those tariffs were announced by President Trump last month, and they apply to imports from Canada and Mexico. However, Lutnick says these tariffs could be lifted if the flow of undocumented migrants and illegal drugs, including fentanyl, into the U.S. stops. Here is Lutnick speaking earlier to NBC's Meet the Press.
The president said, okay, I'll tell you what, if they're in the deal that we made, I'll keep it tariff-free. But for everybody who was outside that deal, who took the risk, who didn't pay attention and respect the agreements that President Trump made his first term, they're going to pay a 25% tariff. And that's sort of like meeting in the middle.
Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick there. Now, U.S. officials say the policy is aimed at cracking down on efforts by countries, including Russia and China, to bypass existing duties. Now, U.S. steelmakers have urged President Trump to resist exemptions to these tariffs, and now U.S. companies that use aluminum and steel are at risk of being hit. For more on the hour's top stories, let's go to Bloomberg's Dan Schwartzman.
As a potential government shutdown looms, House Republicans have announced a spending bill to keep government agencies open through September 30th, which could lead to a confrontation with Democrats. The bill would continue to allow the Trump administration to make cuts while slightly decreasing overall discretionary spending. Democrats and some Republicans have expressed reservations about some aspects of the bill, including defense spending, tax cuts, and the impact on federal agencies and programs. The Republican majority will try to pass a 99-page bill through the House on Tuesday. A U.S. negotiator says a new Gaza ceasefire deal is possible within weeks. The deal would require Hamas to cede some power, but not its rockets and rifles, and would involve the repatriation of 59 remaining Gaza hostages, including U.S. dual nationals. The U.S. recently held direct talks with the Palestinian terror group. Meanwhile, Israel says it's sending a delegation to Qatar on Monday to attempt to advance negotiations to continue the ceasefire in Gaza. Hamas has reported, quote, positive signals in talks with Qatari and Egyptian mediators regarding beginning negotiations on the second phase of the truce. Hamas is currently believed to hold 24 living hostages, along with the bodies of 35 others. In a move to pressure Hamas into releasing more hostages in an extension of the first phase, Israel last weekend cut off all supplies into Gaza. Secret Service agents shot an armed man believed to be from Indiana early Sunday morning near the White House. Local police had warned the Secret Service about an alleged, quote, suicidal individual who was traveling to the nation's capital from Indiana. Security then spotted the man's car, leading to shots being fired. The Secret Service says the man is hospitalized with his condition unknown. 2 days of fighting between Syrian government forces and loyalists to former President Bashar Assad, as well as revenge killings, have resulted in more than 1,000 people being killed, according to the British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. The clashes come 3 months after insurgents overthrew Assad's government. Revenge killings by Sunni Muslims loyal to the government against Assad's minority Alawite population left bodies in the streets of Syria's coastal region. U.S. consumer prices are expected to have risen in February, as Bureau of Labor Statistics figures on Wednesday are projected to show that the consumer price index minus food and energy climbed 0.3% based on the median estimate of economists surveyed by Bloomberg. That number would be less than January's 0.4 gain. According to estimates, the core CPI likely increased 3.2% from February of last year. But while there are concerns about inflation, we're also seeing signs of a softening economy. Bloomberg's Edward Harrison, editor of the Everything Risk newsletter, says the Fed has to weigh both of these factors when considering interest rate cuts, and it may be leaning more towards worrying about economic growth.
You know, if you think about the two pushes and the pull and push of higher inflation and lower growth, you know, the market has definitely been leaning towards the lower growth, pushing the Fed forward in terms of their rate cuts. And given the fact that growth looks to be declining, GDP now, for instance, shows a negative number for Q1, that would say that, yes, they could cut as soon as June.
That's Bloomberg's Edward Harrison speaking on Bloomberg Radio's Daybreak Weekend Show. That's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Dan Schwartzman, and this is Bloomberg.